be being recorded. Those of you, I think most of you would know me. I'm Sean Gibb. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager here at Pro Manchester. And I'm delighted to welcome you to Virtual Onboarding, hosted by Daniel De Le Cruz, founder and leader of Polymensa, chief learner, should I say, of Polymensa. And he's joined by Britney Pierini, Senior Manager, Employee Experience and DIMB at Bread. Following today's session, I'll send out a post-event email, which will contain any post-event collateral, any links to where you can find out any more information around this topic and also other Pro Manchester events, and a copy of the recording if you want to watch back. It'll also include our feedback form, so it'd be really appreciated if you could just take a minute to complete that. It is literally 2 or 3 questions, but it really does help us continue to provide great content for you and the kind of events that you want to see and what you see value in. As I say, please be aware that it's being recorded. Please just keep your microphones on mute for the time being, but there will be a chance for questions later. And feel free to use the chat function at any time to ask questions as we go along, make any comments, observations. So that's it from me, really. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Daniel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Thank you everyone for having us here today. So before we go into that as well, if you'd like to ask any questions, then yeah, use the chat as Sean said, or I think there's a function as well, which is you can raise your hand on Zoom, which is pretty cool because that gives us as moderators sort of an overview of, all right, cool, we'll come to you in a second, right? So we don't see the chat, then that's really helpful as well. And I want to try to make this as interactive as possible. You know, both between Brittany and I, we've got a lot of experience in the whole kind of people management side of things and also virtual onboarding, having done this research recently, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So love to get you involved, love to hear your questions as well. If you've got any input as well yourself, because you will all have had some form of experience in the last 12 months, especially on virtual onboarding, right? So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a presentation for 10 minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A format. And I hope that's fine with everyone. It's just, there's a couple of highlights from the report that I really wanted to share with you and I thought would be useful for you. But then obviously I'd like to get you guys involved because that's the best way to make these Zoom sessions exciting. So let me just see if you can all see this. And if you could just give me a quick thumbs up. For those of you, yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Great. So virtual onboarding. This will have been a topic which has affected all of you, right? It's kind of completely caught a lot of us off guard, this whole idea of hiring someone in a virtual environment and bringing them on board. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to just highlight some companies who have done really well in the last 12 months in this particular area. And what we did is we researched over, I believe it's 41 companies, which were a combination of agencies. And when I say agencies, I mean specifically creative type agencies, design, tech, marketing, and so on. So professional services companies, really, because I know there's a lot of professional services companies on this call today. And then also a couple of SaaS businesses. And the key thing was really to find out what were some of the best in class things that they've done in terms of the virtual onboarding and really bring you with as many tips as possible. So there's a full report of this. It's 34 pages long. Sean, well, we'll share the link later on for you to download it. I'm sure Sean will send it out as well. But basically it's got loads of super practical advice on how to get this virtual onboarding right. I'm going to share with you a couple of highlights. And the first thing I wanted to do was take you through what were, generally speaking, the key onboarding phases that companies were going through in this report, right? And the first thing that came up was this idea of a pre-boarding stage. So a lot of you will probably look at this stage and go, we used to just have people rock up on the day, and then we'll figure out what we do from there, right? Pre-boarding in a virtual environment is super, super important. So it's that period of once the person has signed their employee contract all the way to the point of the first day. So what would traditionally been maybe like they would have worked off their notice period or have a little bit of a break between starting their new job, they're now sat at home at this current point and thinking about whether they've made the right decision to go on to work for your company, right? So this pre-boarding stage was a really, really key phase in making sure that the employee feels like they've made the right decision and they're prepared for their onboarding on their first day and what comes beyond, right? So we'll talk about that in a bit in terms of some highlights. Then there's the first day of working. Then most of the companies sort of split it up into either the first week or the or second week. So they had these 2 weeks of really in-depth onboarding. And then usually it got a little bit more relaxed after that in terms of the amount of information that was being presented to the new starters. And that was typically then split up into sort of phases of 30, 60, 90 days, right? So these were the key onboarding phases, essentially. So I'll take you through a couple of highlights that were in the report. So in terms of pre-boarding, the one thing that came up over and over again was communication response rate is key. Really, really, really important, right? So if you have someone on board like Britney, who is basically responsible for people operations and employee experience, it's really easy to do this because you can get someone like Britney to constantly be in touch with the new starter. If you don't, then obviously it's going to be a bit more tricky. But it's such a crucial element at the moment because people are, like I said, sat at home, sort of thinking about whether they made the right choice or not. So having like immediate responses is really, really key. And ideally, if you can respond to any requests that they have during this pre-boarding phase within 24 hours is super, super good, right? So that's the one thing. The other thing that came up, which was really interesting, was this clear outline of an onboarding process. So really being upfront with the new candidate who's starting about what is their first and second week at the company going to look like? Putting in calendar invites as well in terms of what are all the meetings that they're going to have, who are they going to meet, and so on. All of this was clearly outlined for the ones that were the most progressive companies and have done the best in the virtual onboarding. Now, also, again, this was sent in pre-boarding, right? So they didn't wait for this for the first day. They actually sent this to them in the pre-boarding. So they knew exactly what to expect upfront. Another thing that was pretty much done by all companies, 87% of them really, was sending out a welcome pack and also the equipment. Now, in an ideal scenario, you can do this together as one, and then they get loads of swag, whether it's some branded coffee cups or other elements like a notepad or anything like that. That would be the one item. But then also the equipment, as in if they need a laptop, that's already in setup. That was another key thing that came up. For some of you, this might not be possible if you don't have an IT or whatever, and you're doing this all by yourself. You might want to then wait for the first day for them to get set up. But an ideal scenario, if you really want to do this well, get them all set up so that they only have to open up their laptop on the first day and they're ready to go, right? In whatever format they need to, whether it's Slack, whether it's Teams, or any other tools that they might be using to interact with their team members. So that was one part of the pre-boarding. Another element that I'm sure some of you are doing right now, but there's various upgrades of this, which can make it really, really, really useful. And that is sending out an org chart ahead of them starting. Super, super, super useful, really easy to implement as well. If you think about it, all you have to do is just send them the org chart. Maybe you can upgrade it by highlighting that department that they're working in, highlighting the people that they're going to be interacting with mainly, and also adding profile images of each one of the people. And that's something that's super easy to do, but it has such a great impact because let's say they start their job on the first day and someone is talking on Zoom or someone is chatting something on Teams, and you don't know who it is, right? You don't know, you have no relationship with them. You don't know in what relation they're working to you in the department. Having this org chart available is really useful, and having that picture as well helps massively as well. So this was something that came up several times and is super useful for that period of pre-boarding. A personalized learning and development plan. This actually came from mainly the companies that have already been in a remote setup from the beginning of their business. So some of the companies that were researched had maybe like 100 employees, but they have been doing that from pretty much from the start. They've been remote from the beginning. And what that meant is they had a lot of time to build up this massive resource of everything that an employee needs, right? To learn any single process. And as a result of that, they were able to put together these personal learning and development plans up front and send those already to the candidate before they even started their first day. The great thing about this is that there is a lot of, I guess, idle time in between meetings when you're working from home. So you might have a meeting with your line manager during your onboarding stage, but then there's nothing for maybe another 2 hours. Usually in an office environment, you'd overhear conversations, or you'd go and, make a coffee or a tea, and you'd have a conversation with someone else. All of that is not happening right now. So that having something that they can then continuously feel like their career is progressing is really useful. And this is something that can help with that, a personalized learning and development plan. That takes us through to the first day. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed this, but many people during this whole period have been kind of having a little bit of a, I guess, anxiety around feeling like they need to be seen to be online constantly to show that they're working. It's a bit like that old ticket machine that you'd have where you take it and you say, right, I'm at work, I'm clocking in now and I'm clocking back out. It's pretty much the same thing, really. That green light on Slack that's turned on, and then making sure that, oh yeah, I'm here, I'm available, I'm working. But the reality of that is it's really inefficient to work that way in a remote setup. So if you have the need to respond to every single thing, it's a bit like with email, right? Like if you get an email and you respond to it straight away, you're never ever going to get any work done. So having a really clear guidance around notifications is something that we saw a lot of companies in this research do. So whether that is, have all notifications turned off, and maybe they, on their own terms, figure out when they're going to log in and check. If it's really important, call the person over the phone, whatever the rules are that you put in place, but just having something that will, especially for new starters who are already a little bit scared of, are they doing enough? Are they actually progressing well enough? And really, reducing that anxiety for them, basically, by having some sort of clear notification around that. A profile of the new starter was also something that came out quite a lot. So this can be as simple as having a few questions around, what do they enjoy? What are some of their hobbies? So it brings a bit of personality into it, but then also some work-related stuff. And we saw this in quite a few of the people that took part in the research. And it was a real useful tool, because when the new starter is presented on the first day, you can use that profile, and immediately people start finding things that they relate to, and it gives an opportunity to build those like personal relationships that you would usually in an office environment quite easily do, which is quite hard to do now because, well, you're sat at home and you don't see anyone, right? So having a profile for the new starter set up on the first day was something that came up over and over again, and it's really good for recruitment marketing as well. You can put it on your website, say, hey, Sarah started today, here's her profile. So it does two great things there as well. Now, a few highlights from the first and second week. So a fine balance between too much information and not enough is the thing that kept on coming up as feedback. The challenge here is there is no right or wrong answer. You're going to have to figure out for yourself what this means. But one of the things you can do for avoiding the overload of information on new starters is to make non-essential meetings and reading optional, because sometimes, especially now, again, going back to notification policies, there's this tendency to go, oh, just throw them on every single Zoom meeting that's available so that they can learn, right? But the challenge is they need time to reflect as well. So give them a break. Actually, some companies went as far as maximizing the number of meetings they would have per day in the onboarding period. So they might have only 3 a day at maximum 20 minutes each, right? So that was something that some companies did as well. If you're privileged enough to be at a size of a company where it's possible to meet the founders for new starters, it's an amazing, amazing feeling for them, right? They really feel like the company cares about them as an individual. They feel like the founders care about them as an individual. And it's super, super important right now, especially, again, because people are not in an office environment, but in a virtual environment, they're sat at home. If they can have a one-to-one with the founder once a week, that's amazing, right? That really gets them going. That builds their confidence as well, that they feel that they're part of the company, part of the team. If it's not possible, another way to do this is to have maybe like a weekly or a monthly Q&A with the CEO as a group on Slack or on Teams or over Zoom. That was also something that worked quite well for the bigger companies in the research. But definitely try to include this in your process if you can. Everyone had a buddying system. That was definitely like 100% of the companies did this. There were various variations of this, and the biggest benefit of this really is the fact that right now, people like Britney or line managers are incredibly under pressure to be the single source of knowledge for these new starters. And that can be quite difficult. And giving them the opportunity to have multiple people that they can speak to is actually super useful, so that they don't, it puts the pressure off the line managers, but it also puts a little bit of pressure on the employee, right? Because if you think about it, if they've asked their line manager 10 questions in a day, they're probably going to be at that point where they're a bit worried about asking another question. So they're just going to keep quiet, and that's going to bottle up. And then that never leads to anything good. So having a buddy in place, whether it's someone from another department, if they're junior, maybe someone more senior, if they've been hired at the same time as other people, maybe bringing them together as well is really useful. It gives them an opportunity to meet other people in the company, but also have another source of knowledge. I'm not going to talk about this because I'm sure you've all tried every single thing that's out there in terms of, meeting in a social environment. Some of the things work, some of the things don't work, but yeah, let's skip that for now. If anyone has any questions about this later on, we can chat about more. And I'm sure Brittany has a few ideas for you as well on that. The final thing I wanted to talk about, and then I'm going to open it up as a audience Q&A here, is this period of a 30, 60, and 90 days. And the two highlights that were in the report really were how well some of the companies researched their employees on two things. All right. One was, has the new starter been meeting the company expectations, which I'm sure you do anyways, because obviously they need to be passing a probation period, and then you need to know that information. So having a survey around that at different stages to make sure they are progressing is great. But then the second thing as well is this idea of, has your onboarding process actually been good, right? Have you, as a company, been meeting your employees' expectation? And that's something I think a lot of us probably don't do at the moment. And it's a really good way to, gauge whether someone is actually going to be sticking around. And one of the companies in the research, and I think they hired about 100 people in the last 12 months. They had this survey where they just asked a simple question: do you feel the company's meeting your expectations? Right? If the answer was no, most new starters handed in their notice before 9 months. And if it was undecided, they stayed a maximum of 14 months, which was quite an alarming statistic for them. So every time they heard that, they were, trying as much as they could. But I guess it's a matter of trying to get the onboarding done really well so that you can hold on to these team members even longer than that. Look, those are the highlights. Like I said, the full report is 34 pages long. There's loads more tips in there, and we'll be sharing the link afterwards, after the Q&A. But I want to bring people up on the stage and asking some questions, and I want to check if there's been some questions in the chat as well. Brittany, first of all, over to you. Is there anything from your side that you'd like to add to that?
Well, thank you so much. This report has been phenomenal to see. Very excited to have been a part of it. And it's great to see that despite all of us feeling a little lost in this remote onboarding and virtual life, that we're all having the same pain points, but almost intuitively also doing the very similar things to really help support the new hires and the employees. And I think the big takeaway is, as line managers, as HR people or people operations people, we all are under so much pressure to really ensure that these people feel not just ramped up and they have everything they need, but feel connected to the company, connected to their teammates. It is a lot of work. So one, recognizing that and understanding that as you go through, there will be trial and error. Some things will work, some things won't. Some things work with certain employees that won't work with others. So just want to first recognize that we're all doing a lot of work in this arena, and that it's not necessarily always easy. But I think one thing is that you're here and you want to focus on it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for you, is that you're very committed to that, no matter what it looks like for your company. And it will be slightly different for every company.
Yeah, so true. I'm gonna hand over to the audience now. Is there any questions? Like I said, you can use the raise hand feature or put something into the chat. Sean's back. He's got a question, I think.
I do. So one of the things that our skills committee have been discussing was working remotely, perhaps, and virtual onboarding process perhaps gives an opportunity to make or be to enable new starters to perhaps get access to members of the senior leadership team, even if it's just a quick introductory call with them that might be sometimes harder to facilitate when it's in the office. Is that something that's cropped up or something that's been mentioned?
Yes. So for us, I have found it a little bit easier. We have put together what we call new hire orientation. It happens once a month. So we typically have anywhere from 4 to maybe 10 people every month hired in part of these new hire orientations. I find that my executives like to skip out on that more than if it's a singular one-on-one with an employee or a new hire. Even if it's a short time, 15, 20 minutes, I call them coffee chats. Grab your coffee, meet this new hire. My executives seem a bit more open to that on a one-on-one basis, though some do actually make it to their sessions on new hire orientation. But I do think that CEOs and C-level suite and VPs, leadership across the org really need to make that a priority moving forward, because the big downside of virtual is that a new hire is not going to run into you down the hall or run into you in the kitchen as you both happen to be getting coffee. So taking this time and scheduling it, while it's kind of burdensome, is super important for that new hire to feel connected and really have that time with leadership to reenact some of those opportunities of kind of that more organic meet and greets.
Yeah.
I've just posted something in the chat as well, and then Catherine, sorry, over to you, because I'll be quite curious actually to know from you how many of you are planning to go back to the office versus having a hybrid setup, or even going fully remote, right? As a result of the whole experience and going, do you know what, this works better for us. So feel free to drop that into the chat directly. Sorry, Catherine, over to you.
It was just a comment, really. Just to say, I thought it was really, really interesting. I'm a HR consultant and I support businesses of all sizes, but quite a lot of SMEs, and not many of them have been doing much recruitment recently, but they are starting to again. And certainly that onboarding when you're not in the office is a very different situation to when you welcome people actually face to face and you have that team interaction, and the by the coffee machine chats and things just don't happen. So I've been really conscious about trying to support the companies I work with to help them think through some of those practicalities about somebody who doesn't even know them suddenly starting to have to do some work for them when they've never even met, you know, because the interviews have all been virtual. And just kind of a slight aside, but which kind of makes the point really of what you were saying. My son started his first graduate job in September last year, and he was in the office for a couple of weeks, but then has been home working after 3 weeks of working. So he has actually met some of his colleagues face to face, but he's been really well supported. And some of the things that you were saying about, you know, welcome packs and regular weekly calls from the kind of people engagement person. I've been really impressed with. So as a HR consultant, I've seen some of the experiences he's had as a new recruit. And it just plays out that, you know, he's really engaged, he's worked from home for 6 months, but he feels part of the organisation because of some of the things that you were describing. I can see that they've been doing as well. So I think it was just a comment really, Daniel and Britney, to say that's really useful, the stuff you were saying. And after, you know, years of working in HR, in the NHS and Marks and Spencer, and the last 7 years for my own consultancy, that the virtual onboarding is a new thing. I think that's something, you know, we shouldn't forget. Organisations don't normally do it like this. So any of those tips and takeaways that you've suggested, I think is a memory jogger and does give you food for thought really about, oh, we haven't thought about that. What a great idea. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. It makes sense. And just to kind of add something to your point as well, something that came up in a couple of companies were obviously this idea of meeting people in the company, not just for in a working context, but also in a more social context. Something that was done at a couple of companies were the ones that had committees. So they may have like a charity committee or a social committee or some other committee that basically the new starter would then go and meet in the first 4 weeks, each one of those committees. And then that would also give them an opportunity to kind of get involved in something that, you know, they're potentially passionate about themselves. So that was something that was a good way to get them to meet others in the company, right? Which traditionally would have been in like a social environment in person, which I'm hoping is coming back very soon. We did have a question, I think. So thanks for sharing. Do you have any thoughts on what onboarding should look like in the new future normal? Would part virtual, part face-to-face? Britney, what are your thoughts on this?
I think as we start to move to a hybrid model, which based off the chat, looks like most of you are going to be in that kind of life along with myself, onboarding needs to stay very virtual focused. So everything that has been implemented now in a hybrid world where you have some people in the office and some people at home needs to stay. I think that's the most equitable way to continue onboarding. Pre-COVID, from personal experience, I did not treat necessarily my remote employees as equitably as I could have with the people that were in the office, because I was there, I got to sit down with them in a conference room, and then someone would just dial in. That's not really an equitable experience, because the person on the phone has to either wait for me to stop talking to be able to ask a question versus the person in the room can show me something quickly. So I think this virtual onboarding that we've started to create over the past year really does need to continue, even as you start to bring people in to the office. And you'll start to see articles, at least I have, of what this looks like when we're all back. How do you handle conference meetings and, you know, all hands and different events? And it's still going to be a virtual experience. It should look like this. Even if I might be in a conference room with 4 other people, we all should be on our own computers, our own screens, so that equitably you see one person in every box versus maybe Daniel and I are at home and the rest of you are all happening to be in a conference room and it's just one camera showcasing 30 plus people. That's not a very equitable experience and not something that's going to engage Dan and I to really participate, because we're going to feel like outsiders. So that, I think, really from an onboarding standpoint, not much should change, except that for those that are going to be in the office, they're going to have to get used to this idea of creating this kind of environment of a Zoom room where I get to see 25 people on one screen.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And something as well to add to that is, again, a really good idea is to look at companies that have been remote from the beginning. Now, they will have hired accordingly from the start. So that means a lot of the people that are working in their company have already been in this mindset of remote working, right? They wouldn't have joined a company like that in the first start. So right now, we're going to be in this transition period where people are getting used to how to do this as well, how to actually work from home in a way where it doesn't become super distractive because there's loads of things going on at the same time. But then the other thing is as well is for those companies, something that we definitely saw over and over again was this idea of really documenting everything, having a wiki of some sort, but going into pretty much every single thing is listed out. And there's a software that was mentioned a couple of times, which was called Go One. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but ultimately it's an app that has loads of learning resources on it already, but then you can create your own courses as well. So you can upload your own videos and things like that. And I'm sure there's other platforms out there as well, but having something or having an area where pretty much everything that you do, every single question that comes up is always documented and put in there, it's a really good time to start doing that from now if you haven't done that in the past. And it's, it sounds so obvious, but yeah, for the companies that have been doing this for ages as a remote setup, that's exactly what they do, basically. And that's why the whole kind of what we usually have seen as like learning by osmosis is now translated into the virtual environment by saying, well, it's not osmosis anymore. It's like, here's everything. You pick what you need to learn, basically. It's a very different mindset, isn't it?
It is. Having just started at a new company, this is my third week, and wanting to go to that internal system to start to learn the processes and the policies, finding that we don't have that yet, which is technically why they hired me to build all of that out. But even as my own onboarding experience, that's what I was looking for, is I don't get to sit next to the CEO in the office right now where I can hear conversations or ask him questions on a much regular basis. So I went to go look for all of this documentation. Maybe there is something already in place that will answer my question. And there isn't, but there will be as I start to build that out. But that's a crucial call out, is ensuring that the information is readily available. And if you think it's too much information, it's probably just enough information.
Yeah, I love that. Georgia had a question, Brittany, for us. She says, work for a global company and we recruit 500 plus hires a year in the UK. Do you have advice from the report on how to make this scalable? The managers blocking in time, but also who would be responsible for organizing a buddy system responding to candidates immediately? What are your thoughts on this?
There's going to definitely need to be a people team, an HR team. I know companies call it very different things. At that scale and at that size, it's important to really have someone focusing on onboarding and focusing on that employee experience aspect of it. I have had many times where managers have forgotten to do what they are asked to do. And so implementing a system, whether it's through your ATS or your HRIS, or a Slack bot, there's almost too much out there at the moment, where it can create onboarding checklists that remind the managers what they should be doing, that will remind them until they click that it has been done, is a really key piece. It shouldn't be you constantly having to follow up manually and reminding them. They should have a checklist. They should know what they need to be doing, and ideally through a system that will automate notifications. Currently, for me, for example, we're 15 people in the States, so a system is not quite where we need. We're not at the size where we need a system, so it's just me handling it all and reminding them. But it's super important to have a checklist for everybody, for yourself, for the manager, for the new hire, really, and over communicate it. And then I think the other piece from an onboarding buddy system is the people person should create it, and what that process and policy looks like for your team. And it can be very different. I have had multiple buddy systems. Sometimes they're just a buddy within the team, or it's a buddy that is explicitly outside of the team. So it's a completely different kind of cross collaborative effort. Sometimes it's a junior person that has a buddy who's senior, or vice versa, depending on who's coming into the company. But it should really be a people team. It should have someone really focused on that. And my roles have always been employee experience, focusing on every aspect of that employee life cycle to ensure that the managers and everyone else are doing what they need to do.
Yeah, I think some really good points. Something I think in terms of software, again, in the report, there's a couple of mentions of various different apps that are being used for this. The one that was mentioned the most was Bamboo HR. Don't know if you've come across it before, but that's kind of like was the one that most companies had been using. But there's plenty of other items out there. And look, if all failed, obviously a spreadsheet. I mean, at 500 people hires a year, it would be good to have an app for that. Yeah. There was also another thing that I was thinking about just now for that as well is this idea of I've lost it now. It's gone. I'm sorry, but the apps definitely, yeah. Bamboo HR is one that a lot of people have used. Hopefully that was useful, Jordan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. We're a security business, so it's really difficult to get any kind of new software or tech approved to go, within the business. But that point around that you made about sort of the checklist and maybe integrating that with our ATS, something we can look at. So thank you. That's really helpful.
This is what I was thinking about just now, Brittany. You had this experience as well, where you put in the last company that you were at, surveys as well to monitor or hold line managers accountable. Is that correct? What was it exactly, Brittany?
Yeah, we put together what we called onboarding surveys. There were 3 of them. It was after your first week, after your first month, and then after 3 months at the company. And at the first week survey is really how did we do as a people team or as a recruiting team, or do you feel you were set up with IT and HR and you have the payroll information? Do you feel like you've gotten your one-on-one with your manager? Did your manager do the basics that we require them to do for the first week? Just general. After 1 month, we kind of go deeper into, has your manager shared your 30, 60, 90-day plan? Do you have a recurring one-on-one? And really every check mark that we have for them, putting it into the survey so that the employee can let us know, not necessarily anonymously, because I like to have a personal check-in with the employee, so I don't have it be anonymous, but they'll usually tell me whether things are in fact happening or not happening. And that signals to me if there are any red flags that I will immediately go to that manager and let them know the feedback and work through how are we going to rectify this, how we're going to get back on track. At 30 days is crucial, because if by 90 days they're telling me this, they will be leaving the company probably within their first 6 months. And so these onboarding surveys also serve as kind of a checks and balances for you and any people team or HR team that can help you catch things throughout their onboarding process as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you.
Perfect. So we had another question coming in from Nia saying, do you have any tips on how to facilitate those water cooler chats? They are so important in making new starters relax in the culture and aren't necessarily work focused, but feeling staged.
It's a great question. And one thing that I think a lot of companies are continuing to focus on, because to your point, it all feels a bit staged when you have to book it on a calendar and you have to have a Zoom link attached to it. Regardless of that, one thing I have done that I have found really great success with is creating what we called onboarding meet and greets, where an employee would meet one person from every department. We had 13 departments, so that was pretty easy for us. And over the course of their first 60 days, they would have what we called a coffee chat, and we would actually pay for the coffee. We would say, please go get coffee at your local coffee shop, come back home, have this Zoom call with this new hire, and just chat as if you were meeting each other in the kitchen, getting coffee. Usually those conversations go, hi, I'm so-and-so. What do you do at the company? I do this. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your team and the culture. Get just a general understanding of who this person is in the company. And so being able to recreate that over Zoom, while it is a little bit staged, has been able to really kind of start those meet and greets that, replicate what you would find in an office setting. Being able to pay for the coffee is a definite added plus that people might be more willing to join these scheduled meetings. As we all know, everyone's very zoomed out a little bit. The other option that I have seen and has worked really well has been an app within Slack called Donut, and that will randomly pair people at either every week, every month, or you can customize it. It can be 3 people that will get together on Zoom and again, have more of a water cooler chat. I've seen some companies where their demographic really works well by just putting in a Zoom link for about an hour, midday or end of day, to have people come and talk about anything but work. The rule is no work talk, and just get to chat and bring a cocktail if it's in the evening, if it's in the morning, bring your coffee and just kind of recreate it. And it stays on the calendar every week and people can come in and out as they please. And that is just another way of recreating what would happen. I don't know about you, but at the end of the day, when we were in office, we'd go to the kitchen and grab a glass of wine or a beer, and we'd all stand around the kitchen or the island and have a discussion. And so being able to replicate that in that form still feels staged, I admit, and is of course on Zoom, but it is an opportunity to get people kind of coming and going and connecting with each other very casually without any agenda.
Yeah, I think all of those are great. There's really, I mean, there was loads of stuff in the report, but again, I think you've probably all tried everything and anything. And the good, well, hopefully the good news is obviously that we're coming out of the whole lockdown thing now, which means, you know, that whole, because I guess the double challenge has been, it's not just the fact you're working from home, but it's also been the restrictions that we've had in our personal lives that have had an impact on how much we've enjoyed social things or not, right? So hopefully once those restrictions are lifted again in a few months' time, then everything will be a little bit easier to maybe start doing these social things in person again. And maybe those are the kinds of things you don't end up doing over Zoom, right? Like the kind of more sociable things. I know a lot of companies I'm speaking to at the moment are trying to create like social days in the company when they go back to their hybrid format, so that people come back to socialize to the office. You know, it's a fascinating thing really at the moment. Like what is the role of the office going to be going forward? And looking at the response so far in here and all the responses I hear, pretty much everyone is going into some sort of form of hybrid mode. So it is fascinating. Just looking at some of the things here, team virtual gin tasting. I want to be part of that, Abigail.
Yeah.
Hopefully from the morning. Love it. Are there any more questions for either Britney or myself? No? Cool. Couple of things that I've looked at the report that have been on there that are worth mentioning. If your company is using some sort of form of, like, I guess, framework to manage the entire company, and what I mean by that is something like, you may have heard of EOS before as an example, which is typically for smaller companies, I would say between like 20 and maybe 150 staff. But any other frameworks that you may be using, if there is a kind of a book that reflects the culture of that framework, or even just the culture in your company, giving the new starters that book to read during their pre-boarding or during their first few weeks is also something that we've seen a lot of companies do. And this doesn't even have to be a book. It can be something as informal as like a documentary on Netflix, right? But something that kind of gives the new starter a bit of a feeling of what the culture is like beyond the swag that they're going to get in the post and what they have read up on so far, right? I think is a really interesting way to get people on board with what your company is all about, basically. Cool. Sean, over to you. I think if there's no more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. All for me is just to say thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, Britney, and thank you to all of you for attending. If you do have any further questions, you can drop off your mics now, or I know that I'll be sending stuff out after this call with links to how
I do this every single time, but I almost forget to actually add the link to the report, to the download. So if you want to have a copy of the report, then go to that link. I've just put it in the chat. and then you can download the report directly from there.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Amazing.
everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone,
Thank
for your
you very much.
participation.
Thank
Cheers.
you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.